Okay, so before we can do the second part of 1.9, we have to understand about completing the square. So completing the square basically means we are creating a perfect square trinomial. So the definition of a perfect square trinomial is shown here. A trinomial that can be factored into two identical binomial factors. Essentially, it's a trinomial that has the same two factors. So x squared plus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square trinomial because when you factor it, you have the same two factors. And then we want to understand that we can write it as x plus 3 to the second power. Same thing with this other example here, x squared minus 8x plus 16. When we factor it, we have the same two factors, which is the same as x minus 4 squared. So it's just important for you to understand what you're doing because you have to be able to complete the square in this 1.9 for the circle. So we're just going to complete some squares so we can understand how this happens. So let's look at these problems before they were completed. So let's say we only had x squared plus 6x, and we wanted to create the perfect square trinomial. Now we know it's the 9, but I'm going to show you how it becomes the 9. So when you are trying to complete the square, what you do is you identify your middle term, which is called the b term, right? It's called b. So in a quadratic form, you have ax squared plus bx plus c. B is the term that's the coefficient on the x, and then c is considered the constant term. So in order to complete the square, which is us creating the new constant term, we are going to create this constant term where this blank is. What we do is we always take half of the b term, or half of the coefficient of the b term, and we square that value. So b over 2 squared. So in this particular example, our b is 6. So 6 over 2 squared. That would give us 3 squared, which gives us a 9. So that is how the perfect square trinomial can be created. So it doesn't matter what they give you, you can always create a perfect square trinomial by doing b over 2 and then squaring that value, and that'll create the perfect square trinomial. So let's look at one we don't know already. So x squared minus 4x. So we know we're creating a perfect square trinomial, so we're just going to put plus a blank because whatever we get is going to be positive if we're squaring it. So here our b is this negative 4. So b is 4 over 2. You can put the negative if you want, but you should understand that once you square it, it's still going to come out positive. So that'll give us negative 2 squared, which will give us a 4. So my c term becomes a 4. So what is x squared minus 4x plus 4 factored? Well, it factors into x minus 2 times x minus 2, which is just x minus 2 squared. So that is how you know you have created a perfect square trinomial. You just use the process, and the process is just to find b over 2 squared. Okay, and when you do that, then you are able to complete the perfect square trinomial. Okay, so x squared minus 10x, and we're going to complete these squares. So we're going to complete these squares for these trinomials here. Well, these almost trinomials. So x squared minus 10x. If we want to complete the square here, we know that we're going to figure out what the c term is to create the perfect trinomial. So we would take our 10, and half of 10 is 5, and 5 squared is 25. So x squared minus 10x plus 25, well, what would that factor into? X minus 5 squared. So you can take it piece by piece and then understand that it becomes just x minus 5 squared, or just know that it's always going to be the x, then whatever the sign is here in the parentheses, and then the square root of 25. So like x squared plus 18 plus x. So I know that I'm going to add some blank because I am creating the perfect square trinomial. So I am going to find the new constant term. So how do I do that? I take half of 18 and I square it. So what is half of 18? 9. 9 squared is 81. So when I do that, I have now created a perfect square trinomial. As long as your math is correct, it's always going to factor the same. X plus this time because it's a plus. And then you either take the half of the b or you use the square root of the c that you created. So I can take half of 18 and put the 9, or I can do the square root of 81, which is 9. Either way, I know this is what it factors into. X plus 9 squared. So on this other example, we have an equation, because this is what we're going to have to do when we deal with the circle. X squared plus 8x is equal to 0. So we're just going to rewrite the equation and account for the c that we are about to find. So we are about to identify the new c. Well, it's an equation. So in an equation, whatever you do to one side of the equation must be done to the other side of the equation. So x squared plus 8x plus blank is equal to 0 plus the blank, which is whatever we find. So how do we complete this square? So you should pause this video and try to complete this square. All right, so when we do this, we would take the 8 divided by 2 and then square that value. So 4 squared gives us a 16. So we add 16 to both sides. So what is our problem? X squared plus 8x plus 16 equals 16. So all we want to do is just factor this to make sure we understand what happens. So it would be x plus 4 squared equals 16. So you don't have to do anything here. We're going to deal with that when we actually deal with the circle. This is just completing the square, okay? This is just completing the square. So then on the second example, we have x squared minus 12x plus 4 is equal to 0. So when you have the equation here, you already have a c term, but that's not a c term that's going to create the perfect square trinomial. So we have to move it to the other side of the equation. So x squared minus 12x, because we are about to complete the square. So in order to cross the equal sign, the 4 would have to subtract from both sides. So this becomes x squared minus 12x plus blank, because that's the c that we are about to find, equals negative 4 plus another blank to account for the constant term that we are about to identify. So we're going to complete this square. What does that mean? That means that we are going to take the 12 divided by 2 and square that value. So we're going to get 6 squared, which gives us 36. So we are going to add 36 to both sides. So on the left side, because I have completed the square, what do I know? I know that this is going to factor into x minus 6 squared, and then equals negative 4 plus 36, would just be 32. But you just want to focus on making sure you can complete the square. All right, so this is just all completing the square. And now you can move on to the second video, which is specific to the circle.